So we're now recording, and welcome everyone. We are delighted to welcome you to this event we're calling Abenaki at the Knoll. My name is Megan Brakely, and I have the great pleasure of getting to be the food and garden educator at the Knoll at Middlebury College. And I'm delighted to introduce Chief Donald Stevens, Chief of the Knoll-Hegan Abenaki tribe. So thank you for joining us, Chief Stevens.
Thank you, Quay.
And we'd like to open the conversation with a land acknowledgement. We pause to acknowledge that Middlebury College sits on land which has served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. The Western Abenaki are the traditional caretakers of these Vermont lands and waters, which they call Ndakina, or homeland. We remember their connection to this region and the hardships they continue to endure. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to the Abenaki elders and to the Indigenous inhabitants of Turtle Island, past and present. We give thanks for the opportunity to share in the bounty of this place and to protect it. We are all one in the sacred web of life that connects people, animals, plants, air, water, and earth.
Great. Well, I just want to say, Kwe Piakwa Non Mozi, just saying hello, basically, just to get some logistical things out of the way. This is being recorded, so just to let you know that. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box and we will try to answer them. So we're going to go through the program, and at the end we'll have questions and answers. So thank you for joining us. So traditionally what we do is we have a greeting song. So usually it's like a calling in song, really more than a greeting song. So I'm going to do a calling in song since we're all gathering today. So that's basically a calling in song where we're asking people to come and join us. And then we follow it up with a greeting song. You know how you might have a sports team and you're all lining up and say, good job, good job, good job. Yeah, nice to meet you. Good job, good job. We basically, when people come to our village or come to our area of gathering, we sing them a welcome song, and you're going to learn your first Abenaki song. So hopefully it gets stuck in your head and you'll be singing it tonight. And if you can say Kwano Day, you've learned the whole song. And basically it's only sung and it means welcome, basically, welcome, welcome here. So we're gonna do one or two verses of that, and then that'll be welcoming you here. So
Chief
thank you.
Stevens, Chief Stevens, if I can interrupt really quickly,
Please do.
I'm amazed because I think that the Abenaki welcoming spirit has broken through. In the sound was awfully difficult to capture. So for those who are listening, where that might have been difficult to hear, that was at least my experience. I'm not sure if others heard it, but we can perhaps gather a real recording and share it out to this group in case you weren't able to hear.
Maybe maybe it was too loud and it tried to auto adjust the. So I apologize for that. I didn't know that you weren't hearing it. So, okay, can you hear me now? Great. I just want to give people an overview of who the Abenaki are. The Abenaki are people of the dawn, and I'm chief of the Nulhegan Band of Coassuck, which means, if you were to translate that, it's Nulhegan means place of the fish traps, and Coossuck means pine, and Abenaki means place of the first dawn or first light. So Nulhegan Band of the Coossuck Abenaki Nation would be known as people of the wooden traps who live in the pines who see the first light of day. So Nulhegan Basin is up in the Northeast Kingdom, and the Nulhegan River is still named after us because that's where we lived. So the Nulhegan is one of the largest tribes in Vermont, and we're primarily Northeast Kingdom that comes into the Chittenden County area down to about Otter Creek. Then you have the St. Francis Sokoke Band of Missisquoi, which means place of the flint, which is in Alburgh, some of Chittenden County, Alburgh, Grand Isle, and Franklin County. And they're about the same size as Nulhegan. We're about the same size. Then there's smaller tribes, the Coassuck or the Coas Meadows, which are in Newberry, Haverhill area. And then there's the Elnu tribe, which makes up the southern part of Vermont. And they're a small tribe as well. And they're mostly into living history. So that's kind of the people who are recognized in Vermont. And there is another tribe in Thetford that has not been recognized by the state. They're also a Coassuck tribe. So our territory goes from southern Canada over to about Moosehead Lake in Maine, down through New Hampshire to about Turner's Falls in Massachusetts and all of Vermont. And the only other tribe that was here historically was the Mohegan. They were moved to Stockbridge, so they're called the Stockbridge Munsee Mohegan or Mohegan, and they're out in Wisconsin now. So we still kind of watch over the territory. So we are also part of the Abenaki Confederacy, which is made up of the 5 nations who allied with the French, because this was New France at one point, and according to the French anyway. So there was 5 nations that allied with them. You could look up the Abenaki Confederacy, and so though they were allied with the French, and we were also part of the 7 Nations of Canada Confederacy, which actually were the tribes that fought on the front lines against the British. And so that's kind of a brief history lesson of how we are and who we are today. So I hope that helps kind of distinguish who the Abenaki are, that we are still here, and we're still part of the same dawn. Megan, I don't know if you saw, Max had mentioned that a way to fix that we can turn off the suppressed background noise.
I finally figured out how to do that, and so I hope that it worked. Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Max. We appreciate that. So anyway, so I'm not sure if, is there anything you would like to say, Megan, jump in, or we can move right into how we began this process.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we began this process and how the conversation got started?
Okay. Well, as you know, we're a minority. We received, well, maybe you don't know, but we received minority status in 2006, and through the legislative process, and we gained recognition in 2011. And in 2012, I was able to help get the first tribal land in Vermont in over 200 years for our people. So part of that process, I was asked to be involved with the 5-year health assessment for the state of Vermont. And the results came back with some pretty staggering information about the health of Native people. We don't process sugars very well. It wasn't part of our diet. And we also found out that a lot of people were under the poverty level. So it was a lot cheaper to go to a restaurant and get a hamburger for $1 than it is sometimes to buy a head of lettuce, for $3. And it was just a matter of practicality, and so the nutritional habits, along with the susceptibility of having diabetes and heart disease, were prevalent in our people. So I decided, and our tribe decided, to help create a food shelf, per se, of natural foods. So for a couple of years after around 2013 and 14, we actually started growing crops on our tribal land, but it was a forest. So we started doing mound gardens in the forest. Mound gardens consist of corn, beans, and squash, and we also grew tobacco. But it's pretty amazing how much you can actually grow in a forest. If you can mound the dirt and put water in it and it gets sunshine, you can grow a lot of food. And you don't have to plow up an entire, patch of land. And it actually produces quite a bit of food. But we didn't really have the soil to do that. So what we did was we started branching out to Sterling College because they're close by and they're an environmental school. And we partnered with them to not only, and this was also part of the Seeds of Renewal program, that was trying to find our ancient crops that were indigenous to Vermont and try to bring those seeds back and preserve them, and so we could grow them, like Montpelier squash and skunk beans and Coassuck corn. And part of that was creating the seed banks in order for us to build those seeds to preserve them, because some of them were pretty rare, like Morrisville sunflowers, that's all white. And we wanted to make sure to preserve them for future generations, but also start with our food security program, our sovereignty program. So Sterling College started growing our crops because we wanted to use them as a test pilot, and it was very successful, and we were able to start saving some seeds. The following year, I reached out to Megan and Middlebury College to see if they could also help grow crops. And I think the first year we grew corn, beans, and I don't know if we did squash. I don't remember. I don't think so. It was corn and beans. And I started partnering with Middlebury to do those programs and others, and stayed partnering with Sterling. And this year I reached out to UVM and working with them to grow crops. I've always worked for quite a while with Shelburne Farms. So I started creating this network of people that could help us grow our foods, because, as you know, our land was taken from us. So we couldn't be stewards of that land or allow the land to support us, because Europeans had taken it from us. So, like the land acknowledgement says, that this is Abenaki territory, but we couldn't access that land. We couldn't continue to be stewards, so it couldn't provide for us. So I figured that we helped the Europeans when they first came here to teach them how to grow crops and survive the winters. Maybe they could help us back and help grow food for us, because they had the access to the lands and they had the means And we started partnering with all these people, including NOFA and Rooted in Vermont. And like I said, this is about Middlebury. Middlebury helped and are still helping today. So we took those crops and started making seed banks and started to feed our people. And it's a wonderful way of grounding people like the students and to provide the education around what this means to us, and also preserve our seeds and feed our people. So it's a win-win-win all the way around. And it's quite an impressive program. Do you want to jump in there, Megan, and say anything about it?
Sure. Is now a good time to show some images of?
You can, and then I can do the corn mother story and all that if you'd like, or unless you would prefer to do it later. It's your choice.
Let's have you do the story first. I think that's helpful
Okay.
grounding.
All right, that sounds good. Well, first, what I want to, what's happening with people, and I was telling Megan earlier that people have lost connection to the source, and part of the positive thing that came out of COVID is more people are reconnecting to the land and their food sources, because they have more time on their hands and they can't hang out with people, so they get to hang out in nature, and they are able to grow things because of the grocery stores that were running out of food in the beginning. So part of what I teach students when I talk to people like yourselves or Middlebury College, I ask them to take a seed, like this. Here's some corn seed that I have here, and I ask them to put it in their hands or hang on to it, and I ask people, what do you see when you're looking at a seed? And some people say, well, I see life, I see food, I see a seed, I see potential, and all of those things are absolutely correct. But the way Native people connect to that seed is that at some point in its existence, the Creator had to provide that to our ancestor, so that way they could feed themselves, in the promise to continue that on to help others and to be good stewards. So someone had to have taken that seed, plant it, allow it to grow, weed it, take care of it, reap the benefits of the harvest, and then store it all winter long when all these critters were trying to eat it. And then they had to replant it again and again and again, and hand it to their friends, and hand it down to their children and their grandchildren, to keep this process alive. So when I feel a seed or I have one in my hand, I ask, so not only am I touching creation itself and a gift that was given to us by the Creator, but I'm also touching thousands and thousands of ancestors who kept the seed going in order for me to hold it in my hand. So if any one of them would have thrown it away, I wouldn't have it in my hand, because it would be lost forever. So then I asked the students, what would you do with a seed? Would you plant it? Or would you give it to someone to plant? Or would you just toss it aside? And you would be tossing away all of that stewardship that the hundreds or thousands of our ancestors who took care of it so you could hold it in your hand. It's an awesome responsibility, and it connects you to that source. So that is what the seed really means to us. So I want to tell you exactly how we were given the corn, beans, and squash. This is something we call the green corn ceremony. It is during the harvest, or just after the harvest, we would tell the green corn story and the ceremony and the song. So I'm going to kind of explain that a little bit. So I'm going to tell you the story. So a long time ago, as Abenaki people started to populate the earth, the resources could keep up with the people, the population. Everything was in harmony and in balance. and there would be a lot of fish that would be eaten. There would be crops, natural crops, nuts, berries, foraging basically, and meat, uh, things that we would have available to us. And then as the population grew, those resources became a little stretched, and people were starting to get more and more hungry. Then there was this one family who, this mother had children, and she kept hearing them cry because they were hungry. You've seen some of the images on TV when they're doing some of those fundraising. I mean, the children were hungry, they were starving, and they were crying, and she couldn't stand the crying. So she went to the Creator, and the Creator said, what are you looking for? And she was kind of a practical woman, and she said, my children are hungry. I would really like some food for them. How can I get food for them? And in our culture, in order to get something, you must give something in return. So it's that way. Everything stays in balance. And he said, well, she said, I have nothing to give. And he goes, well, I can't really help you because things will be out of balance. So you really need to think about what you might have that you could provide. So she went back home, and she was hearing her kids crying again. And finally she summoned her sisters, her two sisters who lived in other villages. One was kind of a real sweet, loving sister and always loved to hug. And then there was another sister that was kind of a strong protector of the family and people, and she didn't take any nonsense from anybody. She was a strong woman. And like I said, the mother that had the children she was a practical sister. So those sisters came, and so she went back to the Creator because she kept hearing her children cry. And she said, my love is so great for my children that I'm willing to give my life so that way my children will live and they will have food. And the Creator said, well, that's a pretty large gift. You would need to talk with your husband as well to make sure he agrees, because you came into this together. You should agree. So she went home and she talked it over with her husband, and her sisters had arrived to watch the children. So the husband obviously was distraught. So he went to the Creator and he said, Creator, my wife said that she has to give her life in order for our children to eat. I don't really like that idea. And he said, you should honor her wishes because she is the giver and the keeper of life. Children grow inside her, they carry the water, and she is what makes life continue. And you should respect her choices because it's her choice. So he begrudgingly went back to his wife, and they agreed that she would give herself in order for her children to eat. And she asked her sisters if they would take care of the children and her husband when she went away. So they sat down and they had their fish meal and their porridge and whatever else they had to eat. Her favorite food was fish, so her husband prepared it for her. So the next day, I'm not going to go into all the details, but she had given her life in order for her children to eat. So her husband brought her into the field and he buried her in a mound. And he wept. He wept over her. And he had some food left, some fish. So he buried it into the mound just as an offering. So he was eating the fish. He was giving his wife some too. So he buried the fish in the mound. And he wept some more. And he wept for 4 days. And then he went back to his house because the sisters had come up and got him and said, you can't stay here. You have to come back. So he went back, and after the 7th day, he came back up to the mound because, he wanted to be with his wife. And he saw 2 things growing out of the mound. He saw 2 plants growing, and he was puzzled. It was like, what are those 2 things growing out of the mound? That's where I buried my wife. And he heard a voice of his wife saying, husband, I have not gone away. I have just transitioned as we do to spirit, and I am fulfilling the prophecy of what the Creator is honoring by my sacrifice. And one mound you will see tobacco. Tobacco will grow, and it's for prayer. I never want any of my children to ever give their lives for a prayer or a request. So this tobacco, they can always offer it to receive something. So that's the offering moving forward in order to receive something. So that's why we use tobacco in our prayers. We offer it to the Creator, and when the smoke rises and we get it back, or we do it in ceremony. And that's one of the reasons why you'll see that we will pass the pipe, because you won't, after smoking the pipe, you won't desecrate by telling a lie, because you're dishonoring that sacrifice. So we would smoke it before meetings in order to, we knew everybody was telling the truth. They wouldn't speak out of both sides of their mouth. And the other plant that was coming out, she goes, this is corn. As it grows, you will see my ears form. And as the ears form, when my hair turns black, that is the fulfillment of the agreement with the Creator that my children will be able to eat. They should pick those and consume them, and that's when they will be no longer hungry. And she told them how to keep it, and that was a part of her, and it would always be part of her children from moving there forward, so they would never go hungry. And as you know, corn is pretty prevalent by all native nations, and also it's practically in everything. So you have the tobacco and you have the corn. So he would consistently plant the corn where his wife was buried year after year, and it started to feed them. Well, the sisters said, as I pass on, I would like to be with my sister. So the really loving sister a few years later passed on, and he buried her up with the other sister. And she was the loving sister, so she grew up, and she as the corn grew, she would wrap herself around her sister to hug her sister. So she was always loving her sister, and that's the beans. She was the beans. She would always wrap herself around her sister and perpetual love to hug her sister. And then later on, when her other sister, she was always beating off the critters because they were always trying to eat her sisters. So when she passed on, she asked to be squashed. And if you've ever seen squash, she surrounded her sisters, her 2 sisters, and squash is very picky, and she would ward off the rodents, and she would protect her sisters from being eaten. And that's where the three sisters came from, the corn, beans, and squash. And that's the story of how the corn, beans, and squash came to our people. And part of that is the story, and that is the stories we tell our children and people over and over. And there's a song that goes with it. And I'm not sure how to adjust this. So what I'm not going to use the drum. I'm just going to sing it and see if that Megan can shake her head whether or not you can hear it. But the three parts of the song is Yanni go away, ya ha ha ni go away. Yanni go away, ya ha ha ni go away. Yanni go away, ya ha ha ni go away. Yanni go away, ya ha ha ni go away. That's the sacrifice. That's a song that we sing at interment when somebody is buried. So that is the first part of showing her sacrifice. Then the next part of the song is, oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. Oh, la da gwe, kwe, hi, hi, one day, who. And that sung continuously while the corn is growing. And then at the end, when the harvest happens, it's yanne ho, yanne, yanne ho, yanne ho, yanne, yanne ho, yanne ho, yanne, yanne ho, yanne, yanne ho, yanne ho, yanne, yanne ho, yanne ho, yanne. So that's the victory song or the happy dance. Or so you have the sacrifice, you have the growing of the corn, and you have the victory or the we can eat now. So part of that song is when we act out the actual story where we have people, the kids come in and we have people that hold staffs for lightning and thunder. We have the moon and the sun discs, and we have some corn that's set up on the ground, and we have we show the kind of the sacrifice of what happened to the corn mother and the pretending of the burial. And then we have the dancers come out and circle where the mound is, and they hit their sticks on the ground for thunder and lightning. And we have the sun and the moon going around for the time, and then we have the rainfall, and then a little child will pick up a piece of corn and hand it to an elder woman and say, "Is it ready yet?" And the elder woman would say, "No, it's not ready yet." So they'd put it back down, and they would do this ritual again with the lightning and the moon and the sun and all of that. And they would continually do this until the child held up a piece of corn, and the elder says, "Yes, it is ripe, and the prophecy has been fulfilled." And then they would all dance and do the victory dance and the happy dance, and then they would all leave the circle, and then we would feast. We would create a big feast of all of the harvest, and we would share the harvest amongst everyone, and and then everybody had food for the winter. So that is where we have the story, the song, and the dance that all go together, and that makes up the green corn ceremony. It's quite a very nice ceremony if you've ever seen it. It's a very happy time because people are able to eat. So when we're connecting to the corn, we look at that corn as just like a baby would be nourished from their mother's breast milk. We're nourished from that mother who gave us that food and that substance. So we have a great connection with those crops, the corn, beans, and squash, because that's part of our people. It's part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. It's so we're really connected to those things. It's just not something you eat. It's a thing that you it's animate, it's living, it's celebrated. It's hard to explain, but I'm trying my best to hopefully that you can kind of get. It's not just a bean on the shelf. It's not just a piece of corn that you throw in a pot. There's a whole connection to the source or connection to that story, and hopefully I'm able to portray that to you, and how that connection to the source and your food sources are so important, and how we're in harmony with the web of life. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Megan to do her presentation, and then we can go from there. Does that sound good, Megan?
Thank you so much, Chief Stevens, for the story and the songs. So one of the fun things to me is to think about the ways that we draw ties between the ways that corn and the spirit of corn are so embedded into Abenaki life, and then our goal at the Knoll in trying to preserve the integrity of some of these seed types. And so I wanted to share some images so that folks could get a sense of what this looks like. And I hope that as you're watching the slideshow, you can see, and I hope you have questions about what we're doing, and I can anticipate a couple of them, but we're going to try to save the last 10 minutes or so for folks to ask us some question and answers. So you can type questions in as they come up in your mind, or you can save them for about 10 minutes from now. But I'm going to share my screen here. And put some images in front of folks here. So this year, as Chief Stevens mentioned, we are growing several types of beans. We're actually not growing any corn at the Knoll this year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But we have 4 types: skunk beans, true cranberry beans, Vermont cranberry, and Jacob's cattle. And the last 2 are widely available. And so if you're interested in growing some of those, you can order them from a small co-op like Fedco Seeds out of Maine. And here are some images of what kind of goes into growing the skunk beans in particular. So sowing, training vines, harvesting, shelling beans. And if you're interested in getting involved in helping with this process, you can check out go/Knoll hours. The volunteer hours sign-up links are now live, and we're just about to start harvesting several of these different types of beans, and it takes a lot of hands to do that. And along those lines, we you can tell that these images are taken from a pre-COVID environment. But shelling beans and shucking corn by hand are really wonderful opportunities to gather and to visit and to share in our work. Last year, Knoll volunteers, and actually this top picture is Cornwall Elementary's combined 3rd and 4th grade class, helped us, which was a real joy to share, and to broaden all of our collective goals around education. I got some helpers at home even. Had to throw that in. And so growing Cossack corn took several different steps. When Chief Stevens approached us in the early part of 2019, one of our main goals was this seed preservation and increasing the seed stocks of Abenaki heritage varieties of corn and beans in particular. And so we grew about 480 Cossack corn plants. And there is a lot to say about the process of seed saving of corn in particular in a dairy-rich environment like the Champlain Valley of Vermont, because corn pollen from feed corn that feeds the dairy cows is much of it is the product of large agribusiness, and that pollen is pretty much ubiquitous in the environment in the summertime. So trying to ensure the genetic integrity of these varieties took some really timely and intensive interventions, and a lot of close observation to really get to know the plant and its stages of development. What this looks like in actuality is actually a lot of bagging and containing all of the reproductive organs and the pollen in order to prevent cross-contamination from other corn plants in the area. And here you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the center top slide, these little filaments are just the beginnings of corn silks. And so every corn silk, every single strand acts as a pollen tube, and each one produces one kernel of corn. And so the silks need to be bagged before they emerge to prevent cross-contamination. So we had to learn to recognize the shoots and then put bags on top of them and staple them shut, sometimes as many as 4 or 5 per plant. You'll notice that we grew the corn in rows as a monocrop, and you'll also notice that kosuk is a very short-statured plant, averaging kind of 3 to 4 feet tall. And we spent a lot of time up close and in the corn plants, which would have been really difficult had we been kind of wrestling squash and beans out of the way. And so in our first year of this experiment and in our first year of trying to get to know the corn, and this was my first go with hand pollinating corn as well. So there was a lot of learning, and we thought that making sure that we had easy access to the plants was going to help reach that goal of ensuring the genetics we were looking for. And so harvesting pollen came next, and it was really amazing to get to know pollen as live genetic material that's both everywhere in a Vermont summer and also highly sensitive to changes in humidity and temperature. Corn pollen is really light, and it travels on the breeze. It's also carried by pollinators like honeybees to distances as far as 3 miles away. And so in the Champlain Valley in Vermont in the summertime, not being within 3 miles of corn is virtually impossible. So the next step was to unbag the shoots and quickly apply the collected pollen to the silks and then recover them so that the ears could develop and grow. We had different grades of quality of pollen. We did our best to keep it all straight, and sometimes it meant some really creative note-taking. And sometimes we were more successful than other times. And when it was time, Chief Stevens joined us for a blessing before the harvest, and it was really fun to get to have him come and check in and see what we had been up to. And unwrapping each ear was such a delight, and it was really a treat to get to see what was going to be inside. That was really fun. I'll never forget that.
It was like Christmas.
Yeah. And here are some images of some of the different corn that we found, that we grew. You'll see a lot of different variety. Many demonstrated the expected kosuk size, coloring, and shape between 3 to 5 inches long. So in the fourth photo in the right-hand corner, there's a braid, and those are kind of what are typical and what we were expecting to grow. To the left of that there's a Sharpie there that's kind of hard to see, but it's for reference. And there's one enormous ear. We had a whole range of different sizes, and we had a range of different colors also show up, both in the plants, in the leaves themselves, in the husks, and also in the corn, in the kernels. And so this was really an incredible learning opportunity to learn from the corn mother and to get to know the plants in this way. And I think too, for interns and for me, at least I can speak for myself, to really think carefully about adaptation and compromise in a changed and modern environment. And we were just so grateful to Chief Stevens for his guidance in helping us to think broadly in our approach to that, and also to stay focused on our goal of trying to increase stocks of this seed. So as you can imagine, a global pandemic was not conducive to trying to hand pollinate corn this year. And so we're looking forward next year, fingers crossed, that we can continue to grow out some of the strains that show themselves for next summer. So I'll stop sharing my screen. That's what I have.
I just want to say, Megan, too, that there was three really goals of mine. One is to keep pure seed, so that way we could keep our original corn pure and be able to use it for educational purposes. And it's very small, but it's highly packed with oil. So it's very nutritious, and it has a short growing season. I don't remember what exactly. I think it's in the 65 or something. I mean, it wasn't very long of a growing season. You could almost plant 2 crops if you started it early enough. So you could get quite an abundance. The
It's
second,
remarkably well suited to this climate. It's
it is,
incredible.
yeah. And the second thing was food. So anything that we could, that might have cross-contaminated or cross-pollinated or was whatever the case, that wasn't great to keep for seed, then that was the food that we wanted to use for distributing. We only wanted to keep the good stuff, right? I mean, the more pure stuff, not the good stuff, but you know what I'm saying. And the third is actually something we want to do in the future, is maybe finding a way to, as you saw, the callus flint corns, or the flint corns were a lot larger. And if they mixed with the short Coasuck corn and had a shorter growing season, but they had a bigger, a bigger ear, you could get actually more food for a short growing season, and that's where the copper color corn came. And we would like to actually experiment on seeing if there's ways to produce another variety that might have a short growing season, but yet have a more of a yield. So that's kind of exciting too, to have maybe a new variety or something. So those are kind of the 3 goals, and educating. I mean, there was one of the big components is educating about our people and the rich culture that we have.
Great, thank you. So I can see that we just have a few minutes left, and if anyone has questions, you can go ahead and type them right into the chat, and we're happy to help answer questions.
While they're doing this, you would have seen the skunk beans. There are ancient stories and historical evidence that skunk beans, we used to hang them around our neck as necklaces at hunting parties, because you see them on gorgets and other things. So when you went out to hunt, if you didn't get any game, you could break your necklace off, make bean soup that would carry you a few more days to get you back to the village, and then you would just restring a new necklace. So it was not only functional, but you could carry your food with you. And anyway, skunk beans were really important to us. And the French made beads that was a replica of the skunk beans, so that way we could use for adornment. So, all right, you want to go back and see where the where can we sign up to volunteer? That was from Caitlin. That's your call, Megan.
Go/Knoll hours. You can sign up and read way too much information about it. And if you have questions after reading, just email me, and I can answer the next one. The Knoll is funded. We do have some paid positions. We typically hire interns for both the summer and the spring, and then the successive fall season. Those jobs get posted in January, so stay tuned. Chief Stevens, I think the next one is a question for you.
Yep. Basically, the creator is the creator of all things. To us, there's one creator. There's Tabaldek, who was walking across the universe with Megeso and Tolba. Hence, we won't go into the whole creation story because that would take another quite a while. But maybe someday we can do that. But basically, Tabaldek basically created. He didn't create the land. Basically, the land. The dust from his hands fell on the back of a turtle, and that's why we're on Turtle Island. And then there's multiple spirits, like Spirit of the Woods, Spirit of the Drum, Gluskapi, who helped create humans, and the animals and the trees and all that. So we have one creator, many spirits who do different functions. And so that's our belief system. Let's see, will you pursue growing beans and squash as well?
So we are growing beans this year, and the squash is another really intensive pollination project because squash crosses out very readily. You can do a great Google search and find like squash pollination cages. So that's one that's on hold, as well as I think there's so much more to learn as we continue to hone our process with corn, and so we're focusing there for right now.
Well, one of the awesome things too with squash, and we did this at Sterling College, we had a thing called Montpelier squash, and part of the Seeds of Renewal project did this, that it was crossed with a blue Hubbard. So as you planted it, you would only keep the stuff that showed the characteristics of the Montpelier squash and weed out the blue Hubbard and use that to eat, and then you'd plant it again, and you would keep going through that process till almost every one of the squash were Montpelier squash. So you were basically reverse engineering through growing and only keeping the squash that had the strain that you wanted. And there would always be a little blue Hubbard in there, but I mean, for the most part, you could weed out the cross contamination. It's really fascinating.
The seed saving is really very nuanced, and it's a whole world, which is really cool. There's a lot to find there. Volunteering at the Knoll is typically a 2-hour commitment, but if you get there and you've had enough after 10 minutes, you are welcome. It's pretty loose.
What's on the wall behind me? Well, I have bear hides that will probably eventually become a coat. I have a bear hide on the bed. I have a chief's cape with eagle feathers. I have sweetgrass, which is medicine, some dance sticks, and some war clubs. So I have a myriad of things in the room that you can and can't see. What would volunteering look like during COVID?
Great question. There are all sorts of in the past, volunteering at the Knoll has been very, very loose. This year, folks have to sign up in advance. We have a waiver that folks have always had to do, and we are just making sure that we're maintaining distance. There's a lot of evidence from the USDA and the FDA that COVID is not transmitted through the fomite route via food, and so we will make sure to practice excellent hand hygiene, and we will be harvesting food. We'll be putting the garden to bed, doing all the different types of normal tasks that we do in the garden. So sign up and come find out.
Yeah, and one of the questions are, have the varieties been grown continuously since they were originally cultivated? Yes, of course. That's why we still have them in our hand. They were always cultivated by someone, one of our Abenaki families, or sometimes even Europeans had gotten some of them, and we got them back from Europeans because they were lost to us. So like I said before, if it's lost, it's gone forever. So, and Megan can probably speak more. There's a shelf life. The longer that they're not cultivated, they have a less of a germination process. But it's really fascinating. I won't take a lot of time, but we actually had a historic preservation officer dig up a site that had some corn in it. And it was probably 200 years old. We actually planted the corn. There was like 3 or 4 pieces that were left in an old broken jar that, you know, had survived. And we planted it. Actually, the plant grew. It didn't produce any corn, but it was awesome in the fact that after 200 years, it grew. And, you know, we wish we could have got some seed because we would have loved to see the purity of it. But just the fact that it grew after that many years was just amazing. Anyway, but most of it has a shelf life. And just as where the tobacco comes in, when we do our mound gardens, we surround it with tobacco because we grow our own tobacco and we use it for ceremony. It's not just smoking. We don't do it for recreation. We do it for ceremony. But the tobacco has properties. When you harvest it, you have to be very careful because you'll get straight nicotine sap from the plants right into your skin, and it will make you really lightheaded if you're not careful. But deer and critters don't like that either. So the bugs that were going to eat the corn, beans, and squash will get stuck on the tobacco stalks because they're very sticky. And not only that, but deer and others don't like to eat the plant because of the nicotine, but also because of the stickiness. So that we figured out when we talked about the three sisters, the tobacco came in to grow around it. It's almost like a fence. So it's pretty amazing that all of those work together. Now, I must say quickly, though, that we have found challenges with the Kawasaki corn being so small that the beans can overtake that corn fairly quickly. So I think our ancestors planted them in the mound and some grew up the corn, but I think they tried to have it go up more of a tripod because it can engulf the corn really quickly and choke it out if they're not careful. So there was some mechanism to how they planted the items, especially with the corn and the beans. Let's see. In community, smoking tobacco is an important part of Abenaki rituals. How are you adapting with COVID? Well, smoking is a part of it. It's more of the offering of the tobacco. So if you take tobacco in your hand, you can offer it to a fire and allow that smoke to rise up to the creator in order to get your prayers answered. Or you could offer it on the ground, but we try to always put so the smoke rises, because Mother Earth is down below and the creator is up above. So if you're offering it to Mother Earth, you would just put it on the ground. If you're offering it to the creator of the spirits, then you'd want the smoke to rise up and the wind eagle carry the smoke to the heavens. So and also tobacco would be we could deliver medicine when we smoked it. So we smoke it, but we don't pass the pipe, because of the COVID situation. We will smoke it on behalf of someone, or someone will have their own personal pipe, but we'll ask that we will smoke it and allow the smoke to rise for the prayers while other people can offer their own tobacco as a symbol of being part of that. Or they will give us a little bit of tobacco, like drop it in a bowl or something. We mix it up, and that's carrying the prayers of everyone. But they would do it in a safe manner. But we don't pass the pipe during the COVID. And some people don't smoke. We touch their shoulders. But like I said, with the COVID, we social distance, so we don't have a problem infecting our people. We're already vulnerable as it is. So thanks for asking, Sophia. Any more questions? So what I'll do is, if you're done, Megan, I'll just, we do usually a traveling song, and I won't use the drum, so that way we're not drowning out everything. So it's basically a traveling song. It says, safe journeys until we meet again. So we would sing people out as they left. So it goes, way ah, ya, way oh, hey oh, way ah, ya, way oh, hey oh. Pinocchio wishes Shahane, hey Pinocchio wishiwa, away away oh hey oh, wishes Shahane, Pinocchio wishiwa, away away oh hey oh. Oh, I only did one stanza of it, but it's basically wishing you well on your journeys. And we do have some that send you off and have you come back. That's what your parents would sing to the college students, to have you go and come back to their house. And that's a different traveling song. So we won't go into that. Maybe you'll have me back again sometime and we can go over more things. I would, I don't know if Megan has a survey that she would like you to fill out, or if there are things that you would like to inform her of what you like, didn't like, or what we could change, or other things you may want to see. I will leave that up to Megan to follow up.
And the follow-up will be forthcoming. And we really do, we would love to hear your feedback, and if folks are interested in getting involved and further development, we're all ears. So
Yeah,
thank you, everyone.
we really appreciate you coming. So, like I said, audio, Danawal Mazi, means take care, goodbye, take care until we see you again.
Thank you. I'll stop recording.